WD-40 and a Craftsman wrench. He ain't prejudiced, he's just made in America. He loves his wife, and she's that wife that decorates on the 4th of July, but says every day is Independence Day. She's golden rule, teaches school. Some folks say it isn't cool, but she says the Pledge of Allegiance anyway. He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spent a little more in the store for a tag, and the back it says USA. He won't buy nothing that he can't fix. With WD-40 and a Craftsman wrench, he ain't prejudiced, he's just made in America. Born in a heartland, raised up a family, King James and Uncle Sam. He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spent a little more in the store for a tag, and the back it says USA. Won't buy nothing that he can't fix. With WD-40 and a Craftsman wrench, he ain't prejudiced, he's just made in America. Made in America. Made in America. Yeah, my old man's that old man. Made in America. Winter getting colder, summer getting warmer. Tidal wave come across the Mexican border. Wide back gallon is cheaper by the barrel. Just don't get busted singing Christmas carols. That's us, that's right. Gotta love this American ride. Both ends of the ozone burning. Funny how the world keeps turning. Look, Mom, no hands. I love this American ride. Gotta love this American ride. Mama gets her rocks off, watching Desperate Housewife. Daddy works his ass off, paying for the good life. Kids on the YouTube learning how to be cool. Living in a cruel world pays to be a mean girl. That's us, that's right. Gotta love this American ride. Both ends of the ozone burning. Funny how the world keeps turning. Look, Mom, no hands. I love this American ride. Gotta love this American ride. Oh, little infamous America's town. She gained 5 pounds and lost her crown. Quick fix, plastic, surgical antidotes. Got herself a record deal, can't even sing a note. Plasma getting bigger, Jesus getting smaller. Spill a cup of coffee, make $1 million. Customs caught a thug with an aerosol can. If the shoe don't fit, the fit's gonna hit the shan. That's us, that's right. Gotta love this American ride. Both ends of the ozone burning. Funny how the world keeps turning. Hot dog, hot damn.
Hello, I am State Representative Erica Leon, and I am honored to lead everybody in a prayer this morning. Dear Father, thank you all for bringing us here. In these times of strife, we are reminded that this is not new. In the history of man, there have always been challenges, from our first division with God when Adam and Eve ate the apple, to the fall of Jerusalem, to the persecution and crucifixion of Christ, and to the founding of our country. The story of man is laced with challenges. It is how we conduct ourselves when we face these challenges that shows our character and sets the path of history. Sadly today, we're seeing friend turn against friend. We are seeing people take opportunities to cause harm on social media and other places. This does not help. This is a huge problem for our country. Instead, let us turn to that image by Isaac Potts in the woods at Valley Forge, where he heard a plaintive sound of a man in prayer. He tied his horse. He quietly entered the woods. And to his astonishment, he saw George Washington on his knees, alone, with his sword at his side and his capped hat at the other. Washington was praying to the God of the armies, seeking intercession with his divine aid for the cause of the country, of mankind, and of the world. Father, we beseech you to help us turn away from the desire to disparage others with whom we disagree, and instead to turn to seek your divine aid in healing this country. We ask that you guide us to kindness while strengthening our will to hold to our principles in defense of this nation, our children, and this last bastion of liberty upon this earth. We ask that you strengthen our resolve to hold firm when there are insults against us or against our way of life, and to glorify you. In this first in the nation primary season, we ask that eyes are opened to the challenges and threats against our way of life, and that the focus be on the restraint of government to its proper role, and on the policies set forth by the candidates for this great office. Father, we ask that you open hearts and minds to focus on policies and not personalities, so that we may restore this great republic for generations to come. In Jesus' name we humbly pray. Amen. And I would like to introduce my friend, State Representative Ralph Boehm, to lead us in the pledge.
Thank you, Erica. Please stand. Face the flag. I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Kate Day. I did it that way.
You did. Good morning. I am so excited and so honored to be here today to introduce someone I have followed for a while. It all kind of started in the beginning of our COVID nightmare. You know, we're all staying home. I got the news on, I'm puttering around, and I hear this reporter ask the governor of Florida why he had so much inequity in his PPE distribution. As I rolled my eyes, I thought, I gotta listen to this. So I hear the governor of Florida say, well, when you have a limited amount of supplies, you prioritize. And we happen to know that the seniors are most at risk, the most vulnerable. So that's where I sent it first. I sent it to the nursing homes in the senior communities. And I remember stopping in my tracks, going, oh my gosh, that was logical and so much common sense. And I know it's a sad day when hearing common sense, grabs your attention. But there was more. And I heard him say, you know, while traffic is down, people are staying home, we're going to reprioritize and move up some of our road construction projects to the high traffic areas. It'll be more efficient, less costly, more safe, and less inconvenience for the drivers. I was blown away. I'm going, what is this man's name? So I started following Florida politics. And I was amazed at the things they were able to accomplish, whether it's low taxes, high surpluses, cutting spending, you name it. But what's most dear to my heart as a mother and as now a grandmother is education and our children. And I heard someone who actually was asking, what are our kids being taught? And I was hearing someone who was protecting parental rights and protecting our children. And y'all know, some of y'all know, I've been very involved in politics for a long time. I knew in my gut, this is the man I wanted to support to lead our country. This is his time. We need that kind of logic and common sense in D.C. We need someone who gives us the potential of 8 years to correct the Biden mess. And this is our time to dig in and support the great American comeback. And it's with that, I am so proud and so honored to introduce the next President of the United States, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Great job. Thank you. Are you ready to help me send Joe Biden on a permanent vacation? Thank you, Kate, for the great introduction. We've got a lot of great supporters here. I want to thank all of you. I saw Melissa Blasik. I saw Jason Osborne. So thank you all. It's great to get a little bit of pep in my step this morning after Florida was in the College World Series last night against LSU. And you know, you win some, you lose some, but it was a pretty serious drubbing. But that's okay. It was a great season, and we're here to be able to, I think, turn the country around, which is really what we need to do. I just came back from the southern border, and I was down in Eagle Pass, Texas, Sunday evening, and then into Monday morning. And I can tell you, as a Florida guy, I usually don't get fazed by the heat. This was hot. About 108 degrees, and it was really intense. But what I saw down there, and we know this, and I've been down there multiple times, but every time I'm down there, first things that comes to my mind is, this is humiliating as a country, to not even be able to control your own territory, your own border, to cede the border to Mexican drug cartels, and to allow tens of thousands of Americans to be poisoned with impunity. That's not the America I know, and we're going to make sure we change that. And what I also saw was Florida people down there, which we sent to help Texas people down there, their public safety agencies. They've actually put up a makeshift wall. They've put some barbed wire. They've done all this stuff. The federal government was totally missing in action. I think I saw one Border Patrol agent. He wanted to take a picture with me, so I did. But I didn't see, and it's not the Border Patrol agent's fault. They're not getting any support. And so you see this happening. You have millions and millions of people that have poured in. We have no idea who any of these people are. They're coming from all around the world. I know when I was there all the way back in 2021, there were Libyans coming across. I know there were just people from Tajikistan. And you have about 10,000 Chinese that have come across the southern border. And so I think when you look at the number of criminal aliens that have come in, people on the terror watch list, as much as I hate to say this, I think you will end up having some real harm done from some of these people to some of our communities. I don't know about tomorrow, week, 2 weeks, but eventually that's going to happen. The chickens are going to come home to roost. You also have huge impact on communities having to absorb this many people. You know, immigration, legal immigration needs to be controlled. Of course, illegal is unacceptable, but you can't just dump people in with healthcare costs, with education expenses, criminal justice, and yet that's happening not just at the border, but throughout different parts of this country. And then, of course, you have the drug cartels and the products that they're moving. And what I saw was, first of all, the border is largely unprotected. You know, there would actually be like a piece of wall, and then they just go around. I mean, so, okay, like that's easy for them. But even in parts where you had some legacy wall that was there, some of these are really significant steel beams. The cartels will actually cut through the reinforced walls. They have backpacks on, and they bring the drugs right in, and nobody stops them. So we announced a big plan yesterday so that we will be the president that finally brings the issue of the border to a conclusion. It should not be an issue in this country, because if a country does what it's supposed to do, your border will be secured and your sovereignty will be respected. So we're going to stop the invasion. We're going to fight the cartels. Yes, we are going to actually build the wall, and we're going to restore the sovereignty of this country. And you can have my word on that. And we put out a great plan. We're able to articulate some stuff. But one of the things you do is you defend the border of your country like you would defend your own home. I mean, you wouldn't let somebody just break in, right? And so I think these drug cartels, they operate with impunity. And what I said yesterday, we're going to have rules of engagement at the border. So if these cartels are breaking into a wall and cutting a piece out of the wall and moving product in, that's going to be the last thing those people have ever done, because they're going to end up stone cold dead. And the main theme through our border approach is no excuses. We've been hearing about this for how many decades? Certainly years. It's been such an issue, and a lot of politicians chirp, they make grandiose promises, and then fail to deliver the actual results. And so the time for excuses is over. Now is the time to deliver results and finally get the job done. And we have the plan to do it. But I think more importantly than that, you can look at my record as governor. Every time I told someone I'd do something, I did it. In fact, not only have I done what I promised to do, I've over-delivered on what I promised to do. How many people have you elected that have over-delivered on their promises? Usually it's over-promise, say these great things to get your vote, and then come up short when it comes time to actually have the rubber meet the road. Florida, it's the opposite. We go above and beyond. And even on immigration, you know, we've really led the way. I mean, we just did a great bill to say we want a legal workforce. Can't be coming illegally. First of all, they work for lower wages. It hurts wages for Americans and for legal immigrants. Second of all, you just can't base an economy off illegality. So that's there. Now they're saying people coming across the border are staying away from Florida because they know that we have laws that we're going to enforce. Same thing with people trying to come to Florida by boats. You actually have people run boats from Cuba, from Haiti, from the Bahamas. These are illegal entries into Florida. They get there, and then they try to scatter. Coast Guard's responsible for manning that, and they do a pretty good job, but they don't have enough resources. So we have surged boats, our boats, state boats, to help interdict. And we've interdicted huge numbers of boats. We've repatriated, with the Coast Guard doing it, people that we've given to them a combined 12,000 illegal aliens in the last 9 months, back to Haiti, back to Cuba. And so what's happened is the number of boats prior to that enforcement was at this level. Now it's much lower because people know the law is going to be enforced. Why would I get in a boat, go across treacherous waters to be able to just get turned back? And I think the same principle applies at the border. If they know you are going to enforce the law, they are not going to want to pay a drug cartel $8,000 to run them through all these countries. They're going to know it's not worth doing. And so that will be done day one. we will get to work with a national emergency. We're going to use the military. We're going to use all available resources to finally put the issue to bed. That's going to make our community safer. It's going to make our country more respected. And it is going to help us deal with this terrible opioid epidemic that's been ravaging communities throughout the country. We did a town hall in Eagle Pass, and I had like 10 angel moms come who had lost children to fentanyl overdose. And so this is just something in any part of the country you're going to see. And we see it in Florida at record numbers in Florida. I think every place is at record numbers from where they were. So we're going to deal with it at the source. One of the things that we're proposing to do is to recognize where the fentanyl's coming from. It used to be China would manufacture it, and then the cartels would run it in. Increasingly, China is shipping the precursor chemicals. The cartels are making the actual drug, and then the cartels are moving it across. So we're going to have a task force with the Navy, Coast Guard, other relevant agencies. We're going to interdict boats that are bringing in precursor chemicals. They're killing people. We can't just let that happen. And so we're going to have the most assertive posture vis-a-vis the drug cartels that any administration has ever had. And we have to do it because it will save lives if we can do it. And we've got to do it. Now in Florida, we recognize you got to deal with supply, so we have penalties for people. I just signed a bill a couple months ago that if you market this to children, because they'll actually put the fentanyl in candy now, and they market it to children, and if you kill a child with that, you're getting life in prison. We're going to treat you like the murderer that you are, and I think that's very important that you have stiff penalties for people that are pushing the poison, knowing it's likely to kill a lot of Americans. But you also got to understand that you got to deal with demand and you got to deal with treatment. And we're doing that in Florida. So my wife, our First Lady, she's created a program for schools called Your Facts, the Future, and she will educate the youth about the dangers of fentanyl being laced with different types of drugs or pills or whatnot. You know, it used to be kids could do this, make a mistake, and maybe there wouldn't necessarily be a death penalty associated with it. Now, when you have fentanyl in this, the result could be you die just from taking something off the street. And we need to let people know that this is the stakes. So I think education and demand, you have to fight the demand too. But you also have to treat people who get addicted. So we've created an opioid response recovery network in Florida. Someone goes to the hospital, they get discharged. Guess what? If they don't have any help, they're going to relapse 9 times out of 10. So we now have an ability to get them into a program, stabilize them, get them to manage and cope with the addiction. And the relapse rate in our program is less than 10% for people that go through. So we have to have that approach. It's a whole approach to do all because it's such an important problem. So the border is important. Another thing I've been able to visit recently, I actually was one of the brave souls who visited San Francisco. I would not recommend this right now. And, you hear about it, and I've talked about it. I mean, I criticize it because Florida, I have a unique vantage point as governor because I know what's going around the rest of the country, not from reading news headlines, from talking to people that have fled those jurisdictions and come to my free state of Florida. And I was born and raised in Florida, and I never remember seeing a single California license plate in the state of Florida. California was the place people would try to get to. People didn't flee California, and really for many, many decades, it was kind of the ideal land of opportunity for middle-income folks. And so and there's no question about it, and it's a beautiful state. I mean, they've got great topography. They've got so much cool stuff. And yet, I become governor, we start to see all these California license plates in Florida. Well, I can tell you a lot of my supporters were spooked about that because they didn't know how these people were going to vote in Florida. And remember, before I got on the scene, Florida was a one-point state. It was a swing state. I think all the elections, including my first, were decided by 1 point or less, governor, presidential. Of course, in 22, we did something about that, and we won by almost 20, and so people don't talk about it being a swing state anymore, but But they were concerned about California folks. It turns out these are folks that decided to pick up their families, moved thousands of miles across the continental United States because they'd had enough of COVID restrictions and lockdowns. They had enough of crime. They had enough of the homelessness. They had enough of the taxes and the ideology, the indoctrination in the schools. All these different things have caused people. So people will tell me what's going on. And what I would hear about San Francisco would truly be horrific. I met people in Florida who had their homes broken into. The cops caught the people who did it, and then the cops come and say, "Are you not going to press charges, are you?" Like, "Of course I am." Well, the prosecutor will never prosecute this case because they had elected a prosecutor funded by people like George Soros who says he is not going to prosecute criminals, that he's going to let people go accept offenses that he thinks are acceptable. So car thefts, muggings, home invasions, all that stuff was allowed to continue basically with impunity. Of course the city is going to hollow it out. Of course, if people don't feel safe in their communities, they're not going to stick around. So it led a mass exodus. So I go there, and so I've been hearing all this, and I knew that the city was a shell of its former self. And oh, by the way, they had draconian COVID lockdowns in San Francisco that really hollowed out. So I was prepared to not see great things. But I'll tell you, it's personally shocking when you roll into San Francisco and within 5 minutes, you see somebody defecating on the sidewalk. Then you see people smoking crack. You see people doing fentanyl. You see all this, and all these businesses boarded up. Energy from the place is totally sapped. No vitality. And this used to be one of the great cities in America. And so I think what it shows you is, leadership matters. The type of policies you're embracing matters. And I would challenge you, show me a place that's embraced leftist ideology and has imposed that as their governing agenda that is successful in the United States right now. I cannot think of one. And I can cite you statistics about Florida versus these other places, and I'm happy to do that, but you don't even have to do that. You just look and see how are people voting with their feet. And people are leaving states governed by leftist politicians, imposing leftist ideology, and they are going to greener pastures. The number one landing spot is the free state of Florida. So the ideas that we fight for matter. The ideas that we've implemented in Florida have worked. The leftist ideas that have been implemented in Los Angeles and California and San Francisco, Chicago, are you kidding me? And again, I know this because all I have to look at to see whether Chicago's doing well, I just look at real estate values in Naples. When those are going up, I know Chicago's done something stupid again and people are fleeing. So that's what's happened. They had a horrible run under their mayor. And how do they respond? They elect somebody even more left than the current mayor. Well, that is not going to work. Crime, I think, has already started to shoot up even above what it was because the attitude is like, you know what, let the inmates run the asylum. That does not work. And so, the divide, I think, in some of the philosophy in our country, unfortunately, is between the principles I think we represent in Florida, which are really rooted in the founding principles of this country. They're rooted in, yes, common sense. They're rooted in reality. Versus a governing philosophy that is very much based on woke ideology, based on things that are more theoretical and that may sound okay in a seminar at Berkeley, but when actually put into practice have catastrophic results. And so, unfortunately, we've seen this experiment play out. The guys in Washington are mimicking not Florida, not some of the other states that are doing well. They're mimicking Illinois, they're mimicking New York, and they're mimicking places like California. And it's obviously made our country much worse off. And I look at the economy as a great example of this. Florida, we've probably had as strong of an economy since I've been governor as just about any jurisdiction in the country, maybe even in the world. If you look at, we lead the country in new business formations. We have the second lowest debt per capita, and we've paid down under my governorship billions of dollars in debt. When's the last time the federal government paid down any debt? Are you kidding me? We've run big surpluses. We have no income tax, second lowest per capita tax burden in the country. Businesses are flooding in. And here's the thing, governors usually go out and recruit. I can tell you, since COVID started, I have not done one business recruiting trip because they call us asking how do we get down to Florida or thanking us for being such a great state for all this stuff. So you've seen that. And yet, with the federal government, you've seen policies that have caused people to pay more for everyday items like groceries, rent, utilities. All these things have gone through the roof. And the question is why? Well, sometimes things just happen in an economy, supply, demand. No question. That's not what's happened in the last few years. What's happened in the last few years is a government-induced inflationary spiral. They borrowed, they spent, and they printed trillions and trillions of dollars. And here's the thing. If you could do that without any consequence, then why don't we just do 30 trillion or 40 trillion, right? If that's how it works, then we can do it. But we all know that's not how it works. We all know someone's going to eventually have to pay the bill. And I think the bill has been paid by average Americans in the form of these higher prices that have really pinched particularly working people. D.C. has benefited by all this borrowing and spending. 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in our country are suburbs of Washington, D.C. How does that happen? You can understand if it was like Silicon Valley area or Texas energy area. D.C., they're not producing very much of anything except loads of debt and a lot of hot air. And yet they have all this money pouring into those communities. And it's because the people that are politically connected tend to benefit from the way the economy operates. And if you're not part of that class, then you end up paying the bill. And I think that that's what's happened. You cannot keep borrowing, spending, and printing money indefinitely without having these problems. And I think in Florida, we actually are forced to balance our budget by our state constitution. I'd love to see a balanced budget amendment in the U.S. Constitution to force these guys to stop bankrupting us. The three people say, like, what would be some change? Because, I'm a big believer in our Constitution. I love the founders. I've studied a lot of it. But you're always improvement, and we've had amendments that were necessary over time. What would you do? So I think the 3 amendments I would do a balanced budget amendment. I would do a line item veto for the president, so you can line out individual pork items in the budget. It's not just accept the entire budget in one fell swoop. And then the third I would do would be term limits for members of Congress. And we have term limits in Florida for our legislature. Let me tell you, it works. People say, the lobbyists will take over. Are the lobbyists not taking over Washington as it is? I mean, are you kidding me? It's the right thing to do. And what happens, it changes the incentives. So in Florida, you will be the Speaker of the House for 2 years. Then someone else will come in and you'll be out. You'll be the President of the Florida Senate for 2 years, and someone else will come and you'll be out. And so the incentive is, okay, I have a limited amount of time. I'm not going to be in this office for my whole life. This is the end of the road. I'm going to do something to leave a legacy. I'm going to swing for the fences, and I'm actually going to try to do big things. Instead, in Washington, the incentive is you get a seat in Congress, and their number one goal is to just simply stay in Congress. And why you would want to be there for 30 years, I don't know, because, it's not a great place in many respects, but nevertheless. And so that's the incentive. And so if they have a situation where they have to decide, okay, are we going to curtail some spending and actually try to get this under control, knowing there may be some people that don't like that you curtailed some spending, because every bit of spending has some constituency. So are they going to be willing to do that, or are they just going to charge it to the credit card? Because the people that are eventually going to have to pay that bill can't necessarily vote them out of office right now. So it's always the short-term thinking that happens. And I think in Florida, we've really done long-term thinking. So in our budget, we have a record budget surplus since I've become governor. We've paid down billions in debt. We created a new program to accelerate debt repayment above what we've already done. And so we're going to continue to drive the debt lower and lower. And there are times to do debt, by the way. I mean, if you have, when the interest rates were close to zero, you do projects that you have to do anyways, 100%. But nevertheless, that's what we're doing. And then every year I've been governor, we've decreased the assumptions in our pension fund. In other words, whatever it was when I came in was rosier, and we always reduce down to ensure that no matter what happens, our pension system is going to be funded. I think we're like 8th best in the country with that. And so that's just what you have to do. There's none of that thinking in Washington. The question is, can you just keep going on this way without any type of course correction? I think we all know that that's just not going to happen, and that there will be some type of major disaster as a result. As president, when they put these $1 trillion of spending on my desk, if this is fiscally irresponsible, we have something we can do to defend you as taxpayers. We can veto the bill and send it back to them, and that's exactly what we're going to do. The idea that you would sign these massive omnibus bills, some of the stuff during COVID, which was totally grotesque that they were doing trillions and trillions of dollars, the president's got to be the check and balance on a spendthrift Congress. And so we've done that in Florida, and we will do that in Washington, D.C., because if we don't get this under control, then we might as well just give up. The other thing I think is important is, and I think it actually flows from some of the problems we've seen in these cities with terms of the mentality, is education is really the key to this country's future, and yet our education system is failing in so many parts of this country. The purpose of our school system is to educate kids, not to indoctrinate kids, and we've got to be very clear on that. And part of what flows from that is parents have a fundamental right to direct the education and upbringing of their children. That has got to be something that is recognized. And there's some that think somehow parents just need to butt out and that they shouldn't know what's being taught in their kids' school. They shouldn't have a voice in any of this. Heck, the FBI even sent agents to surveil parents in Virginia who were concerned about what was going on in the school. The schools are important. The school system is an important part of the community, but it does not supersede the rights of the parents. And so in Florida, we've enacted bills like the Parents' Bill of Rights, and we have universal school choice so that the parent can decide what the best school is for their children. And that could mean a charter school, a private school, school district, what have you. You will hear people say you can't do choice in education because somehow that's going to be bad for traditional school districts and public education. I can tell you in Florida, it's turned out exactly the opposite of what all the naysayers say. I was born and raised in Florida. When I was a kid, Florida education was in the bottom 25 states. Now we just got ranked #1 in education by U.S. News and World Report on the NAEP results, the Nation's Report Card. The only thing that all 50 states take, the first post-COVID NAEP results, Florida came in 3rd and 4th, respectively, in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. And so that's something that would not have been the case 25 years ago. It's also the case that if you control for our very diverse demographics, where we've got all kind of languages and stuff that we've got to get kids situated with and get them on the right path, we would be #1 when controlled for demographics in 4th grade reading, 4th grade math. So how does that happen? It happens because parents are empowered to make decisions, regardless of their income, about the education of their kids. So we have a lot of charter schools, which are public schools, but they're not controlled by the school district or the teachers union. And so you end up having parents, and the charter schools only exist if people decide to go there. They're not entitled to a single student. They've got to offer a product that parents have confidence in, and if they do it, then obviously they get more enrollment and they get funding. If you took just Florida's charter population, which is about 360-some thousand kids, it's disproportionately African American and Hispanic and disproportionately low income compared to the state as a whole. If you just took that and it was his own state, we'd be in the top 10 in the country just with our charter school kids. And so you have that, but what's happened with our school districts? School districts also want to have students. They don't want everyone fleeing. So if a low-income mom can go to private school, go to charter school, they got to offer something so that she's confident and interested in keeping them in the school system. So our school districts now have school choice within the school district. So you may not go to the school that you're in your neighborhood. Maybe you go across town because they have a magnet program. In Miami-Dade County, it's the top performing urban school district in America. We have 2.8 million people that live there. Only about 30% of the students actually attend the school, public school in their neighborhood. They either do private, charter, or choice within the public school system. And so that rising tide has lifted all boats. The performance in Florida is much better than it was a generation ago. I think every parent should have that choice in the United States of America. And imagine if we were able to liberate some of these kids in these urban areas like Chicago and Baltimore and Los Angeles, because as long as these left-wing teacher unions are in charge of those places, they are not going to change. And so you have a system that is not going to produce success. If we could provide opportunities for those parents to liberate their kids from school systems that aren't performing, I think it would be a huge, huge dynamic. And here's the thing. We can't be successful as a country if every urban area decays. We have to give unity across the board. So we actually have a plan to get that done in D.C., and I think we have the ability to do a school choice on a national basis, so stay tuned for that. I think it's very important. Now, in terms of the indoctrination, I don't know. Look, I have a 6, a 5, and a 3-year-old, so I see these issues through the lens of not just a governor or a presidential candidate, but as a dad. And my wife and I really believe that parents should be able to send their kids to school, kids should be able to watch cartoons, kids should just be able to be kids without somebody trying to shove an agenda down their throat. And I don't know when this started where the kids are now the target of a lot of this stuff, but I just think it's fundamentally wrong. There was a thing, I think it was in New York City. Some of you may have seen, it was some type of demonstration, and they had like these drag queens saying, the chant was, "We're coming for your children." Well, let me tell you this, adults, they do, it's a free country, right? I mean, I kind of just mind my own business. But you start coming for our kids, we've got problems. And we are going to stand up for our kids. So in Florida, we said, we're not going to have a first grader be taught that they were born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice. It's totally unacceptable. It's inappropriate. Are we doing so good in reading and math as a country that we should be worrying about that? Of course not. So that had never been a part of school for all of American history. Now they're trying to do. So we stood up against it. And, we got universal, I would say, almost support from parents across the political spectrum. Because it's let's focus on the basics. Let's not get off on these tangents with these things that are inappropriate. And that was Republican, Democrat, Independent. So they were appreciative. The media didn't like what we did. The left didn't like what we did. And we actually had a company in Central Florida, some of you may have heard of, who didn't like what we did, called Disney. And, their view was that they wanted to tank this legislation. And in Florida, when they weigh in on something, it's a big deal because they basically run the state of Florida for almost 60 years. They've actually had, until I came on the scene, their own government that they controlled in Central Florida, exempt from laws, exempt from a lot of taxes. They were treated better than any individual or business in Florida based on laws that were passed many decades ago. And so, when they marshal their might, they usually get what they want. But not with me in charge. We don't subcontract out leadership to woke companies in California. We stand for parents and we stand for kids. And it's the right thing to do. Now, what they said after that, because, you hear kind of some of the media try to talk. Actually, these Republicans, a lot of them are attacking me for standing up for the kids and the parents vis-a-vis Disney. They're actually taking the side of Disney. And so what Disney did is they said, you know what? The bill has been signed, but we are going to use resources to get it overturned in the courts or in the legislature. Now, I'm not sure that's consistent with their fiduciary obligation to their shareholders, and their stock price certainly hasn't done very well in the last year and a half, but nevertheless, that's for them to figure out. But here's the thing. You may have a right to do that and to say and be an advocate on that and put corporate resources behind it, but you don't have a right to force Floridians to subsidize your woke activism. And so we had to look and say, the state of Florida has this special relationship with this one company going back decades. We've put this company on a pedestal. And in the past, it's like the all-American company, right? But they've really embraced the idea of getting the sexualized content in the programming for the young kids. And that is just a line that I am not willing to cross. And so we felt we had to take action to stand up for the values in Florida. So we ended Disney's self-governing status in the state of Florida. They live under the same laws as everybody else now. They have to pay the fair share of taxes. That's the right thing to do. That is honestly the free market thing to do. Free market's not about corporate welfare, and this was the biggest corporate welfare boondoggle that you've ever had. So we stood in the breach on that, and we stood for what was right. You know, we've also done things. Look, I've got 2 daughters, 6 and 3. I want them to have opportunities to do things like play sports. So in Florida, we've protected girls and women's athletics. You have a right to participate with integrity. How do you go from swimming on the men's team for 3 years and then switching to the women's team and they declare you the national champion? I mean, come on. And part of it is, obviously, with the girls, I'm sensitive to that because I want my daughters to be able to do well. But it's also a larger issue. Are we going to be a society rooted in truth or not? And the fact is, when you crown that swimmer the women's swim champion, you're asking all of us to be complicit in a fraud, and that I will not do. All right. Final thing I'll say is this, because I want to hear from you all, but final thing I'll say is this. There's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot we will do. None of it matters if we don't win the election. And this party, Republican Party, has developed a culture of losing over many election cycles. We have 49 Republican senators. We should have 55 Republican senators right now. We were supposed to have a massive red wave in 2022. Very unpopular president, Joe Biden, inflation, all these problems. Almost every time you would win if you're the opposite party, and yet we didn't win. We lost ground in the Senate. We had a red wave in Florida. Yeah, we did that, but that's because we delivered results for people. So we're not getting a mulligan on 2024. We don't have time for excuses. We've got to get it done. If the Democrats sweep and they're able to get the White House, House, and Senate, I expect them to try to pack the U.S. Supreme Court with liberal justices. You may end up with 13 Supreme Court justices, and they'll just put 4 liberals on there right off the top. I think they will try to abolish the Electoral College. I think they will move to make Washington, D.C. a state, and I think they will eliminate voter ID in every state in this country while mandating ballot harvesting. And so that's an agenda that is trying to keep people that don't agree with them out of power for a generation. And I think that they're going to take the opportunity to do that if they do. So we have an opportunity to prevent that. We have an opportunity to get the country on a fundamentally better path. I am not interested in running to simply manage the decline of our country better than the Democrats would manage it. I'm running to reverse the decline of our country. So we've got a lot of work to do. We want your support. I can tell you, if you put me up there, as the nominee, we're going to get this done. You'll be able to see us being sworn in on January 20th, 2025 as the 47th President of the United States. But even more important than that, we will be spitting nails from day one. We will be tackling all these issues, soup to nuts, and we will deliver results for you and for the rest of the American people. All right. Anybody got anything? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Governor, in the last
2 elections, most of us in this room voted to drain the swamp twice. Talk to us specifically about why you're the right candidate to folks in New Hampshire to come behind in this primary to drain the swamp and get it done this time, as opposed to the other choice.
It's a great question. And what's your name? Mark Johnson. Okay, thanks, Mark. So the question is, and I remember these rallies in 2016. It was exciting. Drain the swamp. I also remember lock her up, right? And then 2 weeks after the election, don't forget about it. Forget I ever said that. No. One thing you'll get from me, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm not just saying that for an election. And there are promises I could make that may help me marginally politically that I don't know that I could necessarily follow through on, so I will not make that. And I think the idea of draining the swamp, in some respects, I think it misses it a little bit. Because we didn't drain it. It's worse today than it's ever been, by far. And that's a sad testament to the state affairs of our country. But even if you're successful at draining it, the next guy can just refill it. So I want to break the swamp. That's really what we need to do. And part of the way you do that is you understand what's gone wrong. We have a constitution that our founders framed with 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. They did not create a 4th branch of government, an administrative state that operates basically without accountability and with impunity. A lot of the most important things that affect our daily lives now, what kind of car you can drive, what kind of energy you can use, whether you can use a gas stove. And by the way, in Florida, we just made gas stoves tax-free. So you can do gas stoves in Florida. We want you to do it. But those things are being imposed by a bureaucracy. They are being imposed by nameless, faceless bureaucrats. Your members of Congress who you elect are not voting on most of these things. And so it's been a massive transfer of power from the public to these agencies in Washington, D.C. That is not what the Founding Fathers intended. And so we need to reconstitutionalize the government by making sure that these agencies are subject to accountability. Who holds them accountable? The president has to hold them accountable. Obviously, the Congress should hold them accountable with funding and with other things. They've been very lax on that. So you've got to come in, you have Article 2 powers, and you've got to drop the hammer. And so part of what we see with things like weaponization of government is actually things the founders absolutely would have predicted. If you told the founders that the American political system was going to leave an accumulation of power in Washington and these agencies basically to operate with impunity, with no constitutional accountability, human nature being what it is, the founders would have said 100% that power is going to be abused. That's why they designed checks and balances. That's why, James Madison in one of the famous Federalist Papers said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And so that's how they viewed. So this is the logical outgrowth. So what we're going to do, we're going to end the weaponization of government. And that means DOJ, that means FBI, IRS, all of these agencies are going to be turned inside and out. You're going to have it with me. With me, some people say the jury is still out on our FBI director. Not me. He's gone on day one. We're going to have major change. We're going to have, and we've put out some of this, we'll talk more about it, but we're going to do a lot to take power out of Washington. So, for example, we're going to tell every cabinet secretary, reduce the number of of employees within the D.C. area by 50%. And that's your job to do that. But part of what you have to do to really break the swamp is a president cannot do it all by his lonesome. And you have to have the humility to understand that. And the idea that you're just going to come in, snap your fingers, and everyone's going to bow down to you. These people are not giving up their power willingly. Are you kidding me? So you got to have thousands of people come into Washington with you, willing to serve in the administration. Some in the White House, mostly in these cabinets and the agencies. You can't just recycle everyone from D.C. You got to bring people from other parts of the country. You may go for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. Bring your family, go and serve. And part of that is the positions at the top are important, but even the positions 3 or 4 levels down are very important because they're the ones interacting with the bureaucracy. I think something like an attorney general, you have to understand, if you are going in to bring the DOJ to account, that is not going to be popular inside Washington. You are not going to be treated well by the corporate press. You know, the corporate media now, they used to say, oh, we speak truth to power. They run interference for the deep state. I mean, that's basically what, because the deep state leaks to them, then they write or they do different things. And so they run in, they want the status quo. So you need an attorney general that's got a spine of steel, that's going to show up on day one and start cleaning house, knowing they're going to get raked over the coals. But you know, the way I view it, and I tell my folks who work for me, you got to view that as a sign that you're over the target. It's positive feedback when the media is attacking you if you're a Republican and you're actually doing the right things. So we've got, in Florida, I've got a Surgeon General named Dr. Joseph Ladapo. You guys should look him up. He's really good. And he's kind of the anti-Fauci. You know, Fauci, lockdowns, forced masks, no kids in school, forced vax. Joe's like, no lockdowns, kids in school, no force, any of that stuff. And he's been great, but you know, he's challenging the conventional wisdom. Now a lot of people act like they never advocated those policies. I can tell you they did, because they all attacked me mercilessly in Florida for having the state open and having kids in school, and I remember that well. Nevertheless, but when Joe came on board, I said, you know, you're going to be maybe the only Surgeon General in the country willing to stand up and speak out against these failed orthodoxies. You better be ready, because they're going to come at you. And he's like, yeah, I got it. And so, you know, I saw him like a month or two later, and I said, you know, I haven't actually been following what you've done the last week or two, but I see the media is attacking you, so you must be doing a good job. But that's the mindset you got to have, to know you're going into the cauldron, and you either have people that have that fortitude or you don't. Let me tell you this. If you go to Washington trying to make the people who inhabit power there like you, you are never going to get the job done. You just have to understand this is a swamp for a reason. It benefits certain people, and that's the arrangements that they want to keep. So when you're trying to upset that apple cart, they're going to fire at you. But here's the thing, as president, the only way you can deal with it is if you're disciplined, if you're focused, if from day one you realize you're going to have to fight this battle, because ultimately we are playing, this issue here is about the future of a constitutional system of government. This bureaucracy has imposed its will on us for far too long. Now is the time we, the people, impose our will on it.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Quinn Mitchell. I'm 15 years old. And last month, I attended a rally of yours, and I appreciated your remarks on some of the key principles that the Founding Fathers set forth and how it was our duty to uphold them. A crucial part of our democracy is the peaceful transfer of power. Some people think that Trump's actions on January 6th and beyond violated the key principles of America and the Constitution set forth by our Founding Fathers. Do you believe that Trump violated the peaceful transfer of power, a key principle of American democracy that we must uphold?
Are you in high school?
Yeah.
Where do you go to school? You go around here?
Vermont, but I live in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. So you're
Yeah.
from Vermont. Well, thank you for the question. So here's what I know. If this election is about Biden's failures and our vision for the future, we are going to win. If it's about relitigating things that happened 2-3 years ago, we're going to lose. And so I can tell you this. I can tell you this. I can point you to Tallahassee, Florida on, I believe, January 5th, 2023. We had a transition of power from my first administration to my second because I won re-election in a historic fashion. And at the end of the day, you know, we need to win and we need to get this done. So I wasn't anywhere near Washington that day. I have nothing to do with what happened that day. Obviously, I didn't enjoy seeing, you know, what happened. But we've got to go forward on this stuff. We cannot be looking backwards and be mired in the past. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Doreen Monahan, and I'd like you to talk about the issue where you signed the 6-week abortion ban, and why should the American taxpayers pay for 18 years raising these babies and these mothers that don't want to work?
And what's your name again?
Doreen Monahan.
Okay, thanks, Doreen. Appreciate it. Well, first of all, I think that you have to make a judgment about if you. And so Florida's legislature, they did all the exceptions, rape, incest, life of the mother, but then they said, if there's a detectable heartbeat, is that a life worth protecting? And we believe it is. We believe that's important to have a culture of life. And we live in a diverse country, and post Dobbs, other states have taken different judgments on that. But in Florida, we've actually walked the walk. I mean, so we have expanded postpartum health coverage for low-income mothers, which we think is important. We have increased availability of foster care and adoption services for folks. And then my wife, our First Lady, has created something called Hope Florida, Pathway to Prosperity, where she's focusing on, not exclusively, but primarily on single mothers. And let's just face it, unfortunately in our society, a lot of single mothers do not get support from the fathers. And I think that's a poor testament to how our cultures develop with respect to fatherhood. We've tried to promote fatherhood in Florida as being something that is meaningful and essential to kids growing up. But my wife has created a situation where we're not just handing somebody a check, because just handing somebody a check from the government is not going to meaningfully change the trajectory of their lives. And so we've created something called the Care Portal. It is linked to, in each community, churches, nonprofits, businesses, other volunteers in the community. So if you have a mother who needs shelter, it's not just a government program. You may have a church come and set her up. You may have a nonprofit that comes and starts working with her. You may even have people in the private sector, because people want to serve their communities. A lot of times there's just not good connectivity about knowing where to turn. I mean, think about it. If you ended up, you're a single mom with a couple kids, you get evicted from like your apartment, you don't necessarily know where all the resources are. So my wife has done a lot to bring that to folks. What we have found is when they are then being serviced by other folks in the community other than the bureaucracy, they end up being independent from government assistance very, very quickly. And that ultimately, I think, is the goal. And I think that I think we're better off when everybody's got a shot. And we can sit there and say, like, oh, this person's got it made where they're born. This person's born in ways that are where the odds are stacked against them. But I'll tell you this, in America, people have been able to succeed against all odds. I was fortunate to have two parents. We were working class. I had to work hard and doing all that. No one would have predicted I would be governor or run for president, for sure. But I think it's wrong to count people out. And so we believe everybody counts.
Thank you, Governor. Ryan and Candace Swartz, Harbor Beach, Michigan. We drove 12 hours to see you today, actually.
Oh, man, God bless you.
So with that, two questions, if I may. With our out-of-control spending and our seemingly endless checkbook to Ukraine, seems like we're outspending our European allies about 5-1. What's your administration going to do to hold our European allies, let them pay their fair share?
You want to do the second?
Yes, second one also. Gun violence seems to be rampant in this country, especially in liberal anti-gun cities. That's why Chicago is so safe. Okay. With that, it seems like it's already illegal to bring a gun into a school, to shoot an innocent child. What's your administration going to do to protect our Second Amendment rights, showing that gun laws really don't seem to keep the guns out of the criminals' hands?
Great questions. Thank you. So first, our European allies. We are going to say, so look, NATO, after World War II, was done because they wanted to keep the Americans in Europe, they wanted to keep the Germans down, and they wanted the Soviets out. And so that's what developed in kind of the post-World War II order, Cold War, all that. And, all the NATO allies were 100% united. We didn't want the Soviets coming past Eastern Europe, and we obviously wanted Germany to basically be kept in check. Well, now we're in a different situation, and those NATO allies don't necessarily see eye to eye with us about our foremost threat, which is China. You have some, like the Brits and the Poles, they get it, and I think that they're with us on that, but you have others like France and Germany, that they think being more friendly with Xi is the right way to go, that China doesn't really represent a threat. So what I would do as president is say all NATO allies need to do 2.5% of GDP for defense. We can't underwrite security for all of Europe while they don't necessarily share our interests in terms of our posture in the Pacific, which is the most important threat we're going to face as an American. So they need to do a lot more, and we need to insist on it. And I will give Trump credit for saying that in 2016. He was right. They're not where they need to be, and they need to do way more than what they've done. Now, on Second Amendment, we just did constitutional carry in Florida. I signed that into law, and so that's something that we respect people. New Hampshire respects Second Amendment rights, very important. I think a couple things. One, you're right, the places that have some of the most onerous restrictions have all this crime being committed, with guns and without guns. And I think part of the reason is look, a criminal, whether it's a typical street criminal or whether it's somebody that's going to go try to shoot up a public place, they think, am I going to get pushback if I'm going in some of these areas? You're not going to go rob someone's house in East Texas because you're going to get your head blown off if you do that. And people understand that. You go to some of these urban areas and people are basically defenseless if somebody against the bad guys. And I think that that's just the reality. So we're going to obviously protect Second Amendment rights. We will never do, like both this current and the previous administration do, gun control through executive order. They tried to do it in Trump. They tried to do it in Biden with this new rule. I think it's unconstitutional to do it through the agencies. I mean, first of all, a statute I don't think would be, but to just do it unilaterally when you're talking about a Second Amendment right, that does not work. I would also say this, and I think that this is true. You look at some of these troubled youth that get involved with firearms, and they'll take it and they'll try to attack all these people. You used to have in this country, kids would bring a rifle to school. You had wide availability of firearms, and yet you didn't have some of this stuff. And I know the people that don't like Second Amendment are going to blame the firearm, but the reality is something has gone wrong in this society over the last generation. What we've tried to do in Florida is a couple things. So we had the Parkland school massacre the year before I became governor. And so I came in January of 2019. The massacre was February of 2018. And so I got to know a lot of these parents. And I tell you what bugged them was there was just an appalling lack of accountability in the system. And so I came in, one of the first things I did was I removed the sheriff of Broward County, who bungled the whole operation, didn't keep people safe. We got rid. The other thing we did was we got all the recommendations on school safety from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission, and we implemented those and have continued to implement additional recommendations. And so Florida, we've put our money where our mouth is. We've put over $1 billion towards school security. Some of that is hardening school. Some of it is school resource officers. You have in every public school, you have a school resource officer on campus. And I think that that's really important. We also have something called the Guardian Program, which is voluntary, but it allows staff members to get the appropriate training to then be able to carry concealed on school grounds. Now, people say, oh, teachers should not be doing it. No one's forced to do it. I agree, a lot of them don't want to do it, fine. But here's why it's effective. If a school is a guardian school, it doesn't even matter if anybody is actually doing it. Just the fact that some may be doing it, that's going to tell these nut jobs that is not a place that we want to go. So in Florida, we make the schools to be difficult targets. And I think that a lot of people have done a lot of good stuff over there. So that's one thing we do. The other thing we do is we take some of the warning signs seriously. So we've implemented programs where, what really the tragic thing about Parkland was when that shooting happened and the news went out, nobody knew who had done it at this point. And yet if you talk to the people in the community that afternoon, everybody pointed to the guy that did it. They didn't have any evidence. They just knew because this guy was like a ticking time bomb. So I think we need to take some of these really severe mental cases more seriously. I think having they don't have insane asylums like they used to. Look, it's a difficult subject because you're talking about a potential commitment of an individual, and there's liberty, but there's also kind of the overall community. And I just think that the line has gone too far to where we just tolerate people that obviously are having difficulty living in society, and we just want to close our eyes and hope that this is not a ticking time bomb. So in Florida, we try to understand those signals and train people to be able to take action when appropriate. Yes.
Second of all, you have a lot to say in the beginning about the border, and I appreciate the fact that you went down there. One of the concerns that I have is we have thousands of illegal immigrants that are not currently in the country. And while for me, the border is the number one concern that I have, because the border and everybody that comes in affects everything: medical, schools, housing, etc. So what can your administration do with the thousands of illegals that are currently here?
Yeah,
Because
so
it affects
what's your
all
name again?
veterans. Karen Scott.
Thanks, Karen. So listen, right now they're coming illegally. They're given a sheet of paper saying, come back in 2 years, go enjoy America. That is not a deterrent. The deterrent, yes, the wall, all that stuff, the security, we need to. But if you come illegally, the sanction is you get returned to your home country. That's what it has to be. And I understand there's a lot of people. I understand it's not something that happens easily. So basically, we're going to say the people that have come in under Biden, that's going to be the top priority. That's millions and millions of people. But those folks, 90% of them do not have valid asylum claims. They are doing it because these NGOs are telling them to claim that. And look, some of these people are sympathetic because they're treated poorly by the cartels, all this stuff. But you just can't have a society based on the rule of law and allow that to be trampled over. And so, yes, we are going to be repatriating that, and I think it's very important. And then going forward, if you come, don't let them in illegally. Remain in Mexico, repel, do all that. Once you establish both of those two things, you're going to see illegal immigration plummet. I also think it's important to remove incentives to come illegally. In Florida, we did that with employment verification. You've got to be legal to work, and if you do that, you're going to reduce the incentives to come illegally dramatically. No taxpayer benefits for illegal aliens. That's totally wrong. I mean, you think about what happened back when, when we had the big Ellis Island immigration in this country. If you couldn't support yourself, if you were considered a public charge, they sent you back. They were not going to let you be a burden on anybody's community. You had an opportunity to live in a free country. You had an opportunity to make the most of your own lives. But I think the fact that they drew the line there and say you're not going to come and get on government programs, that's why you have so many stories about people that came with nothing and ended up doing well in this country. I guarantee you, if a lot of those people got on the dole, they would not have done what they were able to do. So I think that that's very important. And so in Florida, what we said is, we just did law. We don't have driver's license for illegal aliens in Florida. It's not right to do. But we also said, we're not going to let, because what the local governments were doing, they were getting nonprofits to create ID cards. We're like, we're not recognizing that, nor are we going to recognize out-of-state licenses or IDs for somebody that's here illegally. I mean, I think that it's very important that you do that. And so we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that we have no incentives. But yes, you can't just have all these millions that have come under Biden in particular and just say, okay, water under the bridge. No, you need to begin expeditiously the process of repatriation. Yes.
All right. Governor DeSantis, thank you for coming to New Hampshire. I'm Brian Henchy from Merrimack, and I'm thrilled that you know Melissa Blasek's name, by the way. Yeah. So my question is from Matt Gagnon of WGAN in Portland, Maine. Governor DeSantis, if you get elected, you will be inheriting massive foreign policy challenges, including the ongoing war in Ukraine, and militarily and economically, I botched it, in a militarily and economically aggressive China, and the ongoing threat of global terrorism still lurking in the Middle East. How would you characterize your approach to the foreign policy challenges you will be faced with, including those I've just mentioned? Thank you.
Great question. A lot to unpack there. My basic outlook, and by the way, I'm the only veteran running in all these candidates. And I will actually be, once elected, I'll be the first president elected since 1988 who's actually served in a war in this country. And so, I think it's important to understand that. So one, my overall approach really is rooted in President Reagan's vision of peace through strength. Ronald Reagan served for 8 years. He deployed troops one time to Grenada. And there was a Marxist overtake. They unwound that very quickly. Very modest deployment compared to other things that have happened since then. And he engaged Libya, he engaged Iran. He did do some things. But the result was the Berlin Wall fell less than a year after he left office. And I think it was because people saw that he meant business. People saw he had a strong military. And so he was able to deter threats from fully materializing. And I think what we see with Biden is weakness invites threats to materialize. I don't think the world would be as chaotic as it was if Biden was a strong president. But they understand, bad guys know, they got this guy's number. They saw what he did in Afghanistan. They've seen him flounder on the world stage, and so they take advantage of that. I also think that just as somebody that really appreciated wearing the uniform, really appreciated serving alongside patriots, being a part of a mission greater than yourself means something. You look at today's military, it's going woke. You are pursuing a social agenda in the military rather than having your eye on the ball about mission accomplishment. So we're going to take out the woke on day one as commander-in-chief. There'll be a new sheriff in town, and we're going to make sure everybody knows our job is to fight and win our nation's wars. We're going to promote you based on merit. We're not going to worry about the woke Olympics or any of that stuff, and that's got to be the culture. And I think you'll see recruiting get back to where it needs to be if we have that cultural shift. So that's important, one. Two, our view of the world is going to be that China represents by far the most significant threat to this country. And I think in some respects, compared to the Soviet Union, China's even stronger than at the height of the Cold War. We may not have the level of nuclear brinksmanship that we did there with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but just think about China, how they wield power economically, culturally, and militarily. So I think you've got to deal with all those. So their power over American society and culture is real. In Florida, we eliminated things like these Confucius institutes that they would put in the colleges and universities. They're basically propaganda arms of the CCP. We got rid of those. We also signed legislation prohibiting land purchases by the CCP and related entities in Florida. And so those are things we need to do nationally to make sure that they're not exercising an inordinate amount of influence, or really any influence, over our domestic society. The other thing we have to understand is, and this is as a result of decades of very poor policy choices, they said that if you do most favored nation status to China back 20, 25 years ago, put them in the World Trade Organization, China would become wealthier, they'd become more democratic and peaceful, and we'd all live happily ever after. Well, that didn't quite work out that way. Now, it did hollow out parts of our country. Made some people here rich, but hollowed out other parts. It made China very, very wealthy, and they're now the dominant manufacturing power in the United States. If, heaven forbid, we were in a major war, we rely on China for a lot of the things that we would need to be able to fight that war. Is that something that makes sense from a national security perspective? So we need to reestablish our economic sovereignty from China. I think it's important that we make more things in the United States, particularly industrial base, and expand that. And look, I'm a guy I want government out of this stuff, but I don't think you're going to be able to reestablish that unless you provide tax incentives and other types of targeted programs to say, you know what, semiconductors, you know what, things that go for medical, like during COVID, we've got to do more here, pharmaceuticals, what have you. You know what, we've got to do more telecommunications. All that stuff I think is really, really critical. And so I think it'd be good for our economy too, because I think those are the types of jobs, we really want. So you've got to do that piece too. And I think obviously militarily, we need to view the Pacific the same way the post-World War II generation viewed Europe. It's the number one venue for threats to this country. You look at what's going on in the Pacific. Japan is increasing its defense. They never been threat posed by China. I would want to work positively with a country like India. Biden's people, they give India some grief because India has relationships with Russia on certain things. But I think the most important thing is that India is allied with us to check China. They're fighting China on the border there. We want them in our camp. We want the Australians, all that. So I think you need, and doesn't even need to be formal maybe, but maybe a Pacific version of NATO, because I think the only thing the Chinese recognize is strength. And if they see a strong America, they see our allies united, they're going to be way, way less likely to want to try any funny business. And you look, they're in our own hemisphere. They're working in Cuba. They're working in Central America. We need a 21st century edition of the Monroe Doctrine saying, stay out of our backyard. Very important that we keep the Western Hemisphere free. And the final thing I'll say with that is this. I think you need an expansion of our sea power for the Pacific theater. And the Navy right now, we're under 300 ships. President Reagan had almost 600 ships at the height of his defense buildup. Obviously, you got to fix the culture in the military. Otherwise, it's just not worth. But I think you do need to expand our naval capability. And I think ultimately that could be determinative in making sure we're deterring these threats. Yes, sir.
Governor. My name is David Buckley. I'm from Winthrop, Massachusetts. I've honestly been supporting you since I saw what you did with COVID. And I have two questions. So first of all, my question is with the school system. I like how you said you basically went and stopped the teachers' unions from trying to impose their own policies and wills. So where I come from in Boston, Winthrop Lake, that's basically the case at this point. And it's kind of hard, I can see, because I don't know how we're going to be able to stop that, considering we're a very blue state. But if you were president, what would you do to stop these types of local teachers unions from pushing their will and agenda? And second question is with the Hunter Biden thing that recently just happened. He got basically a slap on the wrist for his charges. But if you were president, would you reopen an investigation if Joe Biden doesn't do anything big? And what would you do to hold him and Joe Biden accountable?
Great questions. Thank you for those. So the first on the unions. So the teacher unions in this country have become very partisan, and they're pursuing a partisan agenda. And I can tell you in Florida, the majority of the members of the union are not even teachers. It's other staff, administrators, all these other things. And look, these are important people too, but the idea that they're looking out for the teachers above all else is not true. We did a big pay increase for teachers in last year's budget, and the union, and basically what we said is, this is only going for teacher salaries, no money for bureaucracy or union or anything. It's all 100% for the teachers. So the union, when they were negotiating with the individual school districts, some of the local unions were holding the pay increase for the teachers hostage for 9 months and not letting the pay increase go through, even though it was available July 1st of last year. And actually, we did it again this year too, so it'll be more money in July 1st. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that is not somebody, because you would want to get the money in the teacher's pocket. It's inflation right now. We've got all these problems. No, they use them as bargaining chips. I also remember during COVID, I was probably the first governor in the country to say, kids need to be in school in person. We can't lock kids out of school. We've got to get them in the classroom. And when we did that in Florida, most of the teachers agreed with me. They wanted to get back because the remote, we didn't do it long, a few weeks. It was a disaster. And Florida has good remote. We've got virtual schools and all this stuff. But it was not good enough, and they understood that. And honestly, it's like, from a teacher's perspective, if you can just do remote and not miss a beat, it kind of says that, okay, then is this that important? So I think a lot of teachers had pride in what they do, and they say, of course, I've dedicated my life to this. I want to be in the classroom. It's not as good if we're not in the classroom. So we actually had most teachers supporting us. However, the teacher union in Florida sued me to try to get the courts to close our schools. This is the summer of 2020. This is years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, your teachers want to be back. The parents were desperate to get the kids back. We knew the data on this was 100% they needed to be back. The media was saying all the kids were going to die. The left was saying it. You go back and look at some of the things we'll say. They will not own up to what they said during that time. The teacher union, when we said you got to be in school, they did coffins. They would put coffins in front of the Department of Education. It was such a fraud. But here's the thing. They're using these dues to try to harm the students by closing the schools. So at that point, I'm like, all right, this is a big problem. So we've done billions of dollars of increase for teacher salaries, but we always say it can only go for teacher salaries. It cannot go for union or bureaucracy. That's important because when people, school districts around the country, states increase education funding, most of that does not end up in the teacher's pocket. They spend it on other things. So that's the first thing. The second thing we said is, you have a right to join this union, but they should not be able to get automatic dues deductions from you. If you want to write the check, fine, but to use the government to take out the teacher union dues is not right. So we gave them paycheck protection because what happens is they're told, sign this form, sign this form. And it's just a blanket authorization. They don't even know how much money is being taken out. So now, if they want to join, they can just write the check monthly, however the union wants it, they can do it. And so that's given a lot of teachers a lot of freedom. So I think federally, the issue is if you believe in parents' rights, if you believe in education, not indoctrination, you cannot look kindly on organizations that are using our schools for partisan gain. And that's what they're doing. That's one of the reasons I want to do the school choice, because it'll liberate kids from all these school systems that don't have their best interests at heart. I can tell you it worked well in Florida. We've been able to foster great competition, and it's very, very important. Now, in terms of this two-tiered system of justice, I can tell you this. Right now in this country, if you are connected to the entrenched D.C. class, you have a different standard of justice applied on you than if you're somebody that is not part of that faction of our society. And you see it over and over again. Hunter Biden, if he were a Republican, would have been in jail a long time ago, and we all know that. And so we're going to reestablish a single standard of justice. It doesn't matter if you're connected to me or against me or this. We're going to make sure that we have one standard in this country, because if we don't, then the whole rule of law is going to completely crumble, and it's been severely damaged over these last many, many years. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the IRS was targeting conservative groups, these nonprofits. I was down in Ponte Vedra Beach, and there's like 6 ladies freaking out that the IRS was coming after them. I'm like, they really would care about your group? And then sure enough, 6 months later, the story broke. They were 100% right that was happened. Here's why, though, we have a two-tiered system. Nobody's ever held accountable. People do it, they abuse power, you move on. We tried to impeach the IRS commissioner back in the day, couldn't get enough support to do it because of what happened. But there's got to be accountability, and if you don't have accountability, you're going to continue to see this stuff happen day after day. So, okay, yes, sir.
Governor Phil Taub, I'm an attorney up in Manchester, New Hampshire, and my wife and I run a charity called Swim with a Mission that helps out veterans. I very much appreciate, first of all, your service in the Navy. Thank you for your service. We appreciate that. And your thoughtful comments about the military and about our foreign enemies and what we're facing. So I want to share a statistic with you that's the same in Florida and all over the country. So since 9/11, in 20 years of war, more than 94 of our own from New Hampshire, soldiers, sailors, and Marines from New Hampshire, went overseas, went downrange, and lost their lives. Right? Our freedom is not free. And in that same time that 94 lost their lives, more than 800 of our own in New Hampshire came home safely and have taken their own lives. And every week in New Hampshire, another veteran takes their own lives. You have a unique perspective, having served and having been governor. Interested to hear your thoughts on what we can do better to serve our veterans.
Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for that. Very, very poignant and very true. So I think back to, oh, good Lord, summer of 2007, I think it was. I show up and hit the ground in Fallujah, Iraq. Assigned to Navy SEAL Team 1 as part of the surge of troops and the anti-Al-Qaeda in Iraq. event that took place and was actually very successful. And in the course of the deployment, you could be on a helicopter with like Army guys. They introduced the MV-22 Osprey, the Marine Corps, when I was there. So you're with Marines, you're doing all this stuff. And so you start to talk to some of these guys. And look, Special Forces is different. Those guys, they're wired for it, and they'll go all the time. But some of these guys in the Army were there for 15 months. Marines, 13 months. Multiple deployments because we don't have a military draft. So you had an enormous post 9/11 burden go on about this much of our society. And World War II, Korea, Vietnam, we had drafts, and you could say pro or con to having that now, but the point is that we're asking these folks to shoulder a huge burden. And I think at the time, it wasn't necessarily appreciated that if you came back and your limbs were fine and there were no visible wounds of war, that somehow you were fine. And the reality is people came back with invisible wounds. And those are not wounds that we understood as much as we should. I think we've gotten a lot better in the intervening years. And what would happen, in my experience, was people would have problems, and the kind of the default result was just pump them with drugs, narcotics. And this gets into a whole situation about big pharma and their stranglehold on this society. And we didn't let that happen in Florida. We didn't let them mandate vax or any of that for COVID, all this stuff. So, but that's a separate thing. But I think the over-reliance on that, what we were seeing is that had catastrophic effects for some of these guys. They just didn't take well to it. It put them in a bad cycle, and yes, led to suicide. So what we did in Florida and what we've done as governor, and when I was a congressman, we got the VA eventually to accept, what are some alternative ways that you can help people cope with these invisible wounds of war? And we had a great group that started, right in my neighborhood in Ponte Vedra Beach, called Canines for Warriors. And it matched veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress with specially trained service dogs. And what happens is when they have, problems, you have the dog there that really helps them get through some of these tough times. The suicide rate of people that went through that was infinitesimal. I mean, they didn't have perfect score, but they had darn close to that. So as a congressman, I was telling the VA, you guys need to embrace this. We see the results are better. What you guys are doing is not working. Let's do it. Finally, they've now embraced it on a certain part. But what we've had in Florida, we've had all these groups sprout up. And they will go and they will help the veterans cope with this. So I think it's a huge issue. I think the reason the suicide rate is what it is a combination of these people are under a lot of unnatural stress. Like doing war is never easy, don't get me wrong. But when you're there for 15 months, and you're basically patrolling, not knowing whether the person walking up to you in a man dress has a bomb underneath it and is going to blow you up, or has an AK-47 that he's going to turn on you, and you have to be on your guard, but if you engage and someone is an innocent civilian, you could end up being court-martialed or something. It's an enormous amount of stress that these guys are under. And to do constant deployments, and I saw, guys, their families break up. Because it's like, you're gone for 15 months. They do let you go back, but it's just not a natural cadence of life to be gone for so many times. So I think there's been an enormous burden placed. In terms of the VA, it's a massive bureaucracy. You need to cut down on the bureaucracy. But providing innovative ways to help veterans cope with these invisible wounds of war is something that we've got to do society-wide, and it cannot be just have people on drugs forever. It just isn't doing the trick. Yes, sir.
Governor, thanks again for coming today and giving us the chance to meet you up close and personal.
Sure.
I think we all appreciate it.
And your name is?
Mark Boyd from Bow.
Okay.
I've worked my entire life, and I paid into Social Security. I, along with the other 317,000 New Hampshire residents, receive Social Security benefits, and we're counting on it for our retirement. How will you protect Social Security for me, my children, my grandchildren, and others in New Hampshire?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question, important question. Look, I'm the governor of Florida. We know a little bit about Social Security and people. It's a lot of my folks there. So people that are on Social Security have made these arrangements. They have their expectations, and I think their benefits need to be protected. I'd say the same thing for people that are getting close to that. As you get into my generation, you look at the trajectory of the program, guy like me is either not going to get it or it's going to look a little bit different. And so, I think certainly for people that are younger, working in a bipartisan way to figure out how do you strengthen this program so that there's a nice pathway without any major disruptions. Because what I would hate to see is some type of automatic cut happen in 10 or 15 years. I think that would be disastrous for senior citizens. And so promise made, promise kept. Protect our seniors and make sure that they get what they need. Thank you. Yep.
This is going to be the final question.
With COVID and the COVID vaccine shot, you got all the different information from the CDC going back and forth, safety and so forth. My husband and I both had a heart incident where we're like, okay, let's get the shot. And our health hasn't been the same since. As president, with any future pandemics or vaccines and so forth, how do you ensure that we're getting accurate and truthful information so we're able to make good decisions for ourselves and not be forced into a decision based on fear-mongering?
You're not getting it from the CDC, I can tell you that. It was a disaster what they did. FDA, total disaster. FDA is captured by the pharmaceutical companies. FDA approved for emergency use an mRNA COVID shot for 6-month-old babies. There was no data to support giving a child of that age that shot. So are we doing this for people's health, or are we doing it for Big Pharma's profits? And we are not going to let Big Pharma rule the roost on this. I'm sorry. It's got to be based on evidence, not profit. And NIH, Fauci. First of all, to turn over the reins to him in 2020 was a catastrophic mistake, and his pronouncements were basically governing. So in Florida, like everything, Fauci says you're wrong, Fauci says you're wrong. He opposed us opening schools. He opposed us having businesses open. He opposed us not having mask mandate. He opposed us on everything with that, and yet he's never been held accountable for being wrong. He's never been held accountable for funding gain-of-function research. How outrageous with your tax dollars that they're creating these super viruses in Wuhan, China. And by the way, COVID came out of the lab in Wuhan. They don't want you to know the truth on that. We all know it did. We all know it did. So we're going to go in, and those agencies are in for a rude awakening because they have failed this country. They have failed the American people. And we're going to have people, I've got all these guys who spoke out during COVID, really, really strong, principled people, to great detriment to their personal careers because they got filleted from departing from the narrative. These are the type of people we'll be able to bring in an administration. My Surgeon General, Latipo, we're doing it. And here's the thing. You never, ever mandate this. To think about a shot that came out, emergency use, it had not been studied like normal ones are. Now, I'm a right to try guy, so I believe if something's out there, you should be able to make a decision knowing that it hasn't been studied. And if you want to do it because you think, I think you should have the right to do it. But as information comes out about possible pitfalls, you've got to level with the public. And the fact is there has been an increase in myocarditis, particularly for men under the age of 50. And my Surgeon General did a study, and the media is so upset that he did this, that we documented the increase in these heart incidents with people that had had the booster shot. That's just the reality. And here's the thing. You guys watch TV, we watch TV. What's the number one thing you see on commercials? Ads from Big Pharma. So the first 30 seconds is kind of like the married couple smiling, hugging, this will be so good for you. Then the next 30 seconds is you may die, you may have a stroke, they list all the possible side effects, right? That's how they do the drug commercials. And yet, they're having us believe that the COVID jab had nothing at all that ever came. That is a lie, and we all know it because there's just no way you can introduce something like that without having it. They've never been held accountable for saying if you do COVID shots, you won't get COVID. They said you will not carry the virus if you do the shot. We know that's not true. We know people got it. And the most recent booster, this bivalent booster, they approved it based on a study of mice, and it wasn't even a human trial. And then they said, take the bivalent booster. Every study that's been come out, you are more likely to get infected if you've had the bivalent. That's just the facts. And so you've got to be honest about this stuff. And they were not honest with people. In Florida, what we said was, because, you had Biden trying to mandate it. Biden wanted you, if you have a job, wanted you to choose between putting food on the table or taking the shot. And here's the thing. A lot of people that didn't want to take the shot had already had COVID. There is something called natural protection and natural immunity, and they wouldn't recognize that. So to have the federal government, not through an act of Congress, which I'm not sure Congress has authority to do it, but just unilateral, bureaucratic, executive action, saying you don't get to put food on your table because you're not willing to do what we say with respect to a shot. And that's something that we won in court on one of them. The medical one, they won in court. I told my hospitals, we're not surveying you on this, and we're not going to participate with the federal government. I don't want my nurses losing jobs because they're worried about having to do this. That is fundamentally wrong. And so you had government trying to force this, and basically a massive invasion of your liberty to say you can't even hold a job. But what we also saw is corporate America trying to impose. I mean, think about it. You're like at an accounting firm, and they're going to tell you what shots you have to take. We've never gone down that road before in American history. So we called when we saw that happening, we called a special session of the legislature. We said, no matter who you work for, government, private sector, don't worry, nobody in Florida has to choose between a shot they don't want and a job that they need. That's your choice to make, and we're going to protect that. And the fact that the government was willing to go through those lengths, the fact that corporate America, Disney was trying to do it in Florida, we had to put the kibosh on that, other entities were trying to do it, for a shot that was under emergency use was a gross violation of power. And none of this stuff, one of the things I've been promising to do, and I'm the only guy that can do it, is have a reckoning for all this COVID stuff. Because government power was abused. We have to understand that. Go back to the 15 days to slow the spread and all the lockdowns that went in some parts of the country for a long time. It did not work. We have to be honest about that. It failed to stop the spread. And people ended up getting infected anyways, but it did huge damage to this country. When I was in San Francisco, some of those businesses have been boarded up since the COVID lockdowns. You look at other major cities, some of them have not recovered since COVID. Florida, we have way more people employed than we did pre-COVID. That's not true for a lot of these other places. The learning loss that happened across this country with kids not being in school, the violations of freedom with respect to vax, somebody taking a vax and then having a reaction. First of all, if you're forcing this on somebody, they have a reaction, you should have to pay the damages for any health problems they have. I mean, give me a break. So we got a lot to do with the medical swamp. But here, just the final comment on the reason why I think we're in this predicament is these elite institutions have been corrupted by politics and ideology. And it's about advancing an agenda more than it is about what really matters. These COVID restrictions and mandates were not about your health. It was about them controlling your behavior. That's what they were trying to do. And that does not have a place here. So we're going to go in. You're going to see huge changes to those agencies. We're not going to have our entire medical system run by the pharmaceutical companies. We're going to make sure that people's individual autonomy is respected. All right, guys, thank you all. God bless. Appreciate it.